just refreshed mine, so I'm all good.
I drained mine. I'm not. Well, I have the dregs.
Water for me.
Oh, virtuous one.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just never acquired the taste for coffee. And it's
Really?
like, at this point in life, do I need to? Do I want to? I don't know.
Yeah, you do.
The answer is yes.
I thought Dave would have answered that for you by now.
I know. I mean, I can even live with somebody who has an espresso machine and makes fancy things every day. And
Yes.
oh, that's nice.
Good morning, Cheryl. Welcome all. This is just the casual banter that happens on live studio restream as we wait for folks to come on. Welcome to Sunday Forum at Calvary. Heidi Rupke and Amber Carswell and Mimsy Jones and I will be having a conversation about Pádraig Ó Tuama, who's going to be, good morning, Yvette, who will be our Lenten preacher actually all of this week. Mm-hmm. Wednesday at noon, Wednesday evening at 6:30 for the live stream of the podcast recording. There's video there as well. And Friday at noon as well. So hopefully this will whet your appetite for more Pádraig. Good morning, Zeta. Good morning, Ginny. Good morning, David from downstairs.
Close the door.
The Rupke house has the whole upstairs downstairs thing going there. That's Heidi rings the bell and Dave comes up when
exactly.
when his services are needed.
But he doesn't bring
from the dungeon.
But no coffee.
Morning, Thomas. Good to see all these names appearing magically.
Jenny Strubing is there.
Yeah, we've got it. Hey, Barbara. Good morning. Great to see you all. The article, it's definitely not required reading ever, these forum things, but the link to the article was available once upon a time. Morning, Carrington. And it comes from, I've got 9 o'clock, but I will roll into a bit of an intro as people are still assembling. Tell you a little bit. Good morning, Bill Craddock. Tell you a bit about Pádraig Ó Tuama. Actually, this particular article, I thought I'd take the opportunity to do a bunch of name dropping, which is one of my favorite pastimes. And it's really fun if you're at Calvary because it gives you the opportunity to, always be brushing up with greatness. So this is a true story. A couple of years ago at Lenten Preaching Series, Bishop Phoebe was preaching for the first time. And who walks in but Mimsy Jones?
And
she also brought her friend Barbara Brown Taylor.
Oh, yeah.
So they came into Lenten preaching and grabbed me by the elbow. I didn't have another job and dragged me to the front row because Barbara said, we're going to sit on the front row because the bishop needs to know that you're here to hear her preach. Is that true? You can correct me if I'm wrong.
that is God's truth.
So we sat there, and it made me love Bishop Phoebe all the more that Barbara Brown Taylor, the most famous preacher other than Michael Curry among Episcopalians, is sitting on the front row when Bishop Phoebe stepped into Calvary's pulpit to preach her first sermon, and she didn't fall over. She just cruised. So,
I fell over for her in the back of the room.
Yes. So here's what else happened. Here's the small world kind of thing. So we went down and ate lunch. Mimsy, Barbara, the bishop, and I, and we were talking. And I said something about that afternoon. I got to meet one of my heroes, Marie Howe, one of my favorite poets, because she was the next person at Lenten preaching. And Barbara said, well, I'm reading her book of poems right now. And then she said, have you heard of this guy named Pádraig Ó Tuama? He's a poet. And I'm about to go over to Ireland and do a gig with Pádraig Ó Tuama. In fact, I'm editing a book. I'm going to send it to you. And sure enough, she did. She sent me this book. Barbara did. Neither here nor there. which is where this essay appears. And of course, I kept the post-it note from Barbara here saying that thanks for lunch, and I'll keep it forever, right? Then it keeps going. I walked over that afternoon to pick up Marie Howe at her hotel across the street. Who was she texting with?
Or
Pádraig Ó Tuama in Ireland. So it seemed like a message from God that this guy, Pádraig Ó Tuama, needed to come to Lenten Preaching Series.
Really?
Anyway,
The
so that's
signs
something I have to go to San Jose and hang out with him.
Whoa.
So anyway, isn't that fun? Like all these really remarkable people kind of make their way through Calvary, and we get to glean their wisdom. And it's really quite a remarkable thing that I think we might even forget how amazing it is. These are really lovely, remarkable folks.
Yeah.
So Pádraig, a little more about Pádraig. That was a long introduction, sorry. But he's a poet and a theologian. Likes to say his work centers on language, power, conflict, and religion. All of these things. He's theologian in residence for the On Being Project. If any of you listen to Krista Tippett's podcast, and he has his own podcast called Poetry Unbound that's part of that On Being constellation. That's really lovely. If you don't think you need poems in your life, at least go listen to Pádraig unpack one for you and see that they are not cold, esoteric, academic things. But he's also he was also the leader of the Corrymeela community, which is referenced in the article today, which is the oldest peace and reconciliation organization community in Ireland. It goes back to the 1960s, and we'll mention thank you, Barbara. There's the link to the article for anybody who wants it. It goes back to Ray Davey, who was a Presbyterian in the 1960s. He comes up in this art. He's not the front man for the Kinks. That's Ray Davies, different guy.
I had been confused over this entire essay, and now I have to completely reframe what I'm going to talk about today.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'd never heard of him, so
Neither of them, huh?
range in our ages.
So anyway, so there's a thumbnail sketch of Pádraig, and this was actually an article that he recommended when I got in touch with him and said, "Is there something you might be helpful for us to read?" And he said, "Well, I've got this little piece on Celtic spirituality that might be a nice warm up." And here we are.
Wow.
So I thought I'd ask the panel. This book is neither here nor there. The Many Voices of Liminality. And since we're going to start with the 10-cent word, liminality, who wants to say what that is and why it's useful, not just to impress people that you know the word liminal or what it signifies, or if you have a connection with it?
I can remember Barbara Brown Taylor, since we're dropping names, talking about thin places. She, I think, had been to Ireland, and as I was looking into it a little more yesterday, the word transition kept coming up. It's a thin place, but it's a transition. I think Pádraig may say in here between life and death, and communicating as he dreams about people who have recently died. When he talks about that at the beginning. So, if any of you read this this article that that Scott forwarded to us, it's really, really good. So it will.
Yeah,
it's a liminal piece, shall we say?
Any other connections? You other two?
Yeah, no. For me, liminality just means like the sense that there is more to the world than meets the eye. And that can happen in ways that are like deeply joyful and I don't know, moving ways and different places. But it also to me is something like creepy, like we were talking about, and then name dropping Nathaniel Hawthorne's short stories this morning. In the way that the sense of eeriness comes through about a completely mundane place, right? This is just a the tales of the Northeast in the autumn, right? But there's something about the rustle of the leaves. There's something about the way that he describes the place that fills you with a sort of dread of what's actually going on in the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm thinking the Raven.
Yeah.
Oh, it was Raven.
Mm-hmm.
To drop another name. Heidi, it's your turn to drop.
No, this is a word I don't think of a lot, so I appreciated Pádraig
Heidi.
kind of going. Am I muted?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay. That he's kind of going around and around it because he never goes straight at it, and I don't know. I feel like the liminal places I feel are sometimes the universe like winking at me, but you use the word dread, Mimsy, and I think that's
That was me. That was Amber.
Sorry, Amber,
Just,
one of you estimable ladies.
I get that a lot.
That I think is where I kind of feel right now, like this liminal place, kind of reaching the end of. Well, maybe we're reaching the end of a pandemic.
I can't hear her.
Can you not?
We can.
I can hear
Just
you.
a line. Just this wind up of life is going to be changing, and then there's just a whole lot of. It's almost like feeling you're on the beach and a wave comes up, and the sand is moving away from your toes.
Yeah. And it also washed away all the marks we'd made and thought this is where and it narrowly refers to a boundary place, a threshold, and everything you're describing is exactly how the direction he took it. This place, sense that there's more to the world than I see because I'm on the edge of, I'm going to overlap maybe, and I'm going to do something completely inappropriate and kind of jump way off the lectionary this morning in my sermon and talk about Ruth meeting Boaz in a corner of the field that's been set aside, these corners for foreigners and the poor. And that's another kind of liminal place. So the whole book's about different peoples playing with that idea. Pádraig went to Celtic spirituality, and he says this, which he can say, I hate much of what's written about Celtic spirituality.
Yeah.
Can I just quote Pádraig Ó Tuama forever then? And be like, well, Pádraig Ó Tuama says he hates Celtic. So I don't have an opinion, but
well, let's maybe we will.
I do.
I wonder what you got out of what he's pushing back against, in maybe popularized versions or simplistic versions of Celtic spiritual. What do you think he was bristling at?
Well, there's a sort of like sickly sweetness that a saccharinity that goes along with much of what we idealize about other people's spirituality, right? Like, and we have lots of tropes like that throughout the sort of like noble savage, or like the return to the earth of Native American spirituality was a really big thing when my grandmother was younger, and like people just dipping into something that made them feel a certain way, which was sort of like open or alive, or they were moved by something that can be true and good for them to experience, but as really just a creation of their own and not an engagement with what Celtic spirituality would be. That's my thought.
Yeah, no, if anybody notices,
I'm looking for the place where I think it seemed to me he was saying people look at a landscape as sacred. And I think that's when he said, Jesus, God, Jesus, and Mother Mary, please don't talk like that. I think it's more what Amber was referring to. It's that liminality.
Heidi, go. What were you?
I was going to say I'm wearing a different necklace than the others today, so just I feel like I'm representing the lay person here, saying I really haven't thought much about Celtic spirituality. So if he hates what's been written, I'm like, well, it makes me kind of want to read it.
Yeah. Well, so jumping on what that section Mimsy said, he says, Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, I thought landscapes don't have spirituality. This one had heather, or an Irish trull. I don't know how to say it. I don't know how to say it in the Irish.
Yeah.
But sometimes spirituality, and it can be any kind of spirituality, as Amber's referring to, has a way of making the world in front of us kind of gauzy and less real.
Yeah.
And part of the Irish story too is I love it at the end. He's St. Patrick's poems were just things, stones, physical things in the earth, not billowy, new agey feelings.
Yeah.
But also the part of that Ireland is a troubled place.
Yes.
Yeah.
A bloody place. It's a place of poets, and it's a place of division, and the IRA and the Orangemen, and so it felt like the essay, which I thought kind of brilliantly, but also abruptly, kind of goes from consideration of thin places, dreamscapes. And dreamscapes in a way that he doesn't make light of. He's saying, my friends appear to me in my dreams after they've died, and I don't know what to make of that. But then takes us into a spirituality that should be grounded in the things of the earth. And next thing we know, we've got our friend Ray Davey, a Presbyterian minister who in the 1960s was a POW, in the Second World War was a POW, and was delivered, he was POW in Dresden, and was only delivered during the firebombing of Dresden, in which 25,000 people died. And so Ray Davey steps out of this experience to say, thank God, can I say, thank God I'm free? He's in this very ambiguous place of saying 25,000 people died and I get to go on. What do I do about that? And he went on and founded Corrymeela a few decades later as a place where people could come have hard conversations that hopefully would keep us from ending up in a place where war and death has to happen in order to go forward. So it's a place of reconciliation. So I don't know, that happened very quickly. Like this is 3 or 4 pages. We've moved from dreams to the landscape to Dresden. And I wonder what just moving quickly into these places did to y'all who read it.
Well, I love the way he moved from the heather being tough and how nobody, the animals can't eat it. It's tough stuff. And then he goes into the tough realities of that war. And the way it reminded me of COVID when he said, how do you count to 25,000? How do you count to 500,000? And I thought, I love that Corrymeela, he hated the fact that it was given all these fancy synonyms, but it's a lumpy crossing place, is what it really means. It reminded me of the lumpy Calvary pew seats.
Oh, that's great.
Lumpy seat, yeah.
And I am such a fan of this writer and poet that I pray someday he could come here. When we have 100 years of celebration, maybe we'll bring him in. But I just thought that was so cool about the realities and not dressing them up and making them in, as Amber says, some fuzzy wuzzy thing.
In case y'all didn't, for those who might not have read it, what Mimsy's referring to is that somebody said that Corrymeela meant hill of harmony, where all this reconciliation was. And he said, what a fool, it means lumpy crossing place in Irish. Which has a lot more to do with the hard work of reconciliation. If you're actually in an intractable place where you can't talk to somebody and your hatreds are aroused by the sight of that person, that's a lumpy, lumpy crossing.
Yeah.
A lumpy crossing.
Yeah.
When we talk about loss, and Mimsy, you just mentioned COVID.
We've had some lumpy crossing places in the country lately, it seems to me.
We have. I think Mimsy can't hear Heidi. This is a very strange thing going on.
It's
here.
very strange.
You can hear the rest of us.
Maybe
Okay.
Maybe I'll do a hand signal or
something lumpy has occurred between Heidi and me. I don't know what it is.
Go ahead, Heidi.
Mimsy, we'll have some reconciliation later, even though you can't hear me say that. But I was thinking about recently with COVID and loss. Almost a year ago, I had a Zoom call with friends from 15, 20 years ago. And one of the friends had, she was dying of cancer, and she was 47, and she'd been fighting for several years, had a couple of young kids, and but we knew we were getting close. And then COVID shut everything down. And so there were maybe 8 of us on the screen together, just talking. And this was one of our first Zoom calls when we didn't know, like, wait a minute, how do I do gallery view? And it was such a strange coming together of these spirits from 15, 20 years ago. And, you know, we asked her how she felt about the pandemic. And she said, honestly, it's kind of nice knowing everybody else is home too. You know, we're all together in this, and I'm not the only one who's stuck at home right now. And that lumpy crossing, that thin place was there as we learned how to use this clunky technology to walk with someone a little bit closer to her death. She died in May. But that was something that came to me because of Pádraig's piece.
That's interesting. Some of the clumsiness in our lives around how we've had to rearrange things, there might be some grace in that difficulty. It is heartening to see someone take this effort. I'm going to do this thing. It's clunky, and I'm going to get it wrong, and I'm going to look funny. I'm going to freeze with my mouth open in an ugly position. Yeah, I love that, Heidi. I'm sorry for your loss. Yeah. It's a hard time to lose people. It's a hard time for these transitions when we have to be in liminal spaces, like the death of a friend.
Yeah, liminal definitely feels like, it seems like it should be a happy word, like that gauzy word, but it to me feels full of remembrance and loss.
Yeah. I got one more name I got to drop. So there's this brilliant mathematician I know named Ardell, and she studied math. And what she says is, I think I've said it in other places here before, that in math, a limit is this place where the formula kind of approaches an axis but never hits it, like it heads off toward infinity. So a limit mathematically is actually a place of infinite possibility rather than kind of energy petering out toward the edges and like the core. And it's kind of an interesting way of thinking of things, suggesting that there's all this possibility and great power and energy at this. In fact, actually, Bill, I'm seeing Bill's comment here. Maybe a thin place is not a boundary place, but a dynamic that is shifting and alive.
Yeah.
This is true in agriculture too, right? Permaculture, the boundaries are places where there's great fruitfulness. Go ahead.
No, in that great scene from C.S. Lewis, the last battle, right? The line is further up and further in, right? That you'll never exhaust. It's a picture of the end of things, and yet with the end of things for these people who had gone through it, the line is further up and further in. Like you'll never exhaust what this is.
Yeah. Further up and further in. More and more of life maybe is included and encompassed. Mm-hmm. It might be one more way that he's pressing our conceptions of spirituality.
Yeah.
To make sure it encompasses what is hard and harsh and difficult and raw. Otherwise, it might not be up to the task once we find ourselves in that difficult situation where all the images and the language we carried into it seem like they're not quite up to the task. I don't know if that makes sense. He's at one point he said, what did he say about? it ought to include heaven as well as hell. I can't remember where that went.
Yeah,
but
if not, what's the
striking.
point?
If it's not, what's it worth?
Yeah.
So he tells a little bit of his own story as well, coming to Corrymeela. And this is maybe related to this. He said, this is on page 17. I lead Corrymeela now. I arrived exhausted 15 years ago and found myself breathing. He talks earlier about spirit, spirari, ruach in the Hebrew. Spirit is breath. Found myself breathing for the first time. First thing it felt like, because I could say that I was gay and human and full of faith and fear. And it was not that nobody cared. It was the opposite. They did. It was not that I was welcome regardless of those things. Those things were regarded. Regard from the French, meaning a steady gaze or esteemed. I wonder what that notion of regarding, a steady gaze, not looking away, maybe adds to our conversation about what a meaningful faith might include.
Yeah, because so much of polite conversation are the things that, you look away, you're like, oh, we look away from these aspects of life or people that we don't like, and we say, well, regardless of these things, this is how we can live in community, rather than this is the fullness of who you are. And it wasn't like, I don't know, just thinking along the lines of these sort of like culturally appropriated spirituality, that one thing about it is that, like, when you meet someone who says that they find God in nature, right? It's very rare that person is at the mercy of nature in any way. Like, we have insulated and protected ourselves from all that nature has to throw at us, and sometimes, most of the time, that works. I mean, there are very rare occasions now where we lose water or our pipes burst in these crazy acts of weather, but like, versus someone like John Muir, who is totally at the mercy of nature and has more to glean and gain and give from that experience of nature and all it has, than the person who's just, here's the part of nature that I like and I really enjoy it. So and so the same with human beings, right? That there's something false about compartmentalizing these things of what we are, and then finding ourselves tolerable only in such that we are able to do that.
We're very much in control. It's nature on our terms, oftentimes.
It reminds me of, I'm old enough to remember Thomas.
I love what he said about regard. To lead a place of reconciliation is to think of the stories that have been disregarded, that have been discarded, cast away, considered peripheral or ignorable, and to people who've lived fragmented lives and need to have their edges re-enlivened. It just reminds me that COVID has given us a chance to do that too, to regard what is right in front of us, instead of pining away about something else. Hello.
We may have to have our edges re-enlivened when we learn to come back together.
Well said.
In new ways. Heidi, what were you going to say?
I was just remembering what Amber was saying about nature and sort of the Thomas Kincaid paintings that were so cute and sort of comforting to some people. And yeah, nature is not comforting. It is wild and bloody and scary, and that's it hurts. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, bringing that into this conversation about conflict, in another essay, Pádraig talks about conflict actually being a powerful opportunity. We receive a lot of information, hugely important information, in real conflict, when we don't look away, when we regard, when we say, actually, this is intractable as far as we can see. he wants to name that as a powerful place, even though it includes death and loss and hurt, and doesn't exclude any of that. He says to move towards each other in some reconciling project is a rejection of other options. It's a rejection of the solitary path. What's he getting at there, do you think? I don't think of reconciliation as rejection, but it hit me. What am I letting go of in this? Oh, I see some other.
We're letting go of our egos and opening ourselves to risking ourselves to other people. Very different to live a solitary life of regular prayer, healthy food, and so forth. But what is that? It's not living, I think, is what he said. When we're not in communion, not so much communion, but when we're in community together and allowing things that, as Amber said, are unpleasant, kind of jolt us out of. I've been out of water a couple of times unexpectedly in the past few days. It just goes off. So I've kind of learned how to have a pot of water just hanging around in case I don't have any water at all. I just think the community idea is something we all need to remember.
And he wrote that poem that so offended his friend. I'm sure it was lovely, right? Like, this is a masterful poet sharing this work with his friend, and somehow even this, what he thought was the loving act, was something for this other person that was not, and was not received in such a way. And the agony that he describes, and wondering what's going to change in this friendship now. That won't, it will always be broken in a way, right? Reconciliation not being the reverting to the past and the way things were. The friendship will now always bear the marks of what has been unintentionally done to it, but done to it by the people who are in it. It's right? A bit like breaking a window, right? You can glue it back together, but you're going to see the marks of what's been wounded there. And Dave very helpfully quoted Thomas Merton, and what Thomas Merton says about love, right, is that we it's the action of no longer making someone in our image, right, regarding them for who they are and not who. That is the true loving gaze. And that's very difficult. And who knows what that poem was trying to do in making this person in Pádraig's image. Like, that's kind of what rolled through my mind with that, but it's something we'll do.
Yeah, but think about that. I don't mean to quote that songwriter, but the crack where the light gets in. I mean, when you think of the window with that mark, it may always remind them that they survived that breach. And it's more beautiful than it really was. It means something now, instead of just, oh, it's so nice and clear.
Maybe it's stained glass afterward.
But he is really clear, right? That forgiveness, in that if his friend forgives him, he can't undo. The friendship will always include that hurt. And that's important information to have when we think about reconciliation, even in small ways, even personally. It's not this illusion that it can be lifted out and we can return to what was before the hurt. So it has to include it. Again, we're back to this kind of comprehension that forgiveness and reconciliation, and ultimately the spiritual life, has to include these things. And I want to read that. Some people might not see what Dave posted. So on liminality from Thomas Merton: how far I have to go to find you in whom I have already arrived. You have predicted everything. You have left me in no man's land. So that's the part of that that experience of liminality, is feeling how hard it is to go find you in whom I've already arrived. It kind of feels both distant and intensely present at the same time. Suzanne says, this isn't what my experiences of thin places have been. Boundaries dissolve, and you've stepped into a reality you haven't known before, and that you're part of a sacred infinity. Yeah. No?
Madges. Do you see Madges too?
Oh yes, it's rolling. Here we go. Madge says, this is a lumpy space, thin space for me today. The birthday of two people who were and are very important to my life, both of whom lost so much because of alcoholism. Oh, I'm sorry, Madge. These discussions of ragged edges, conflict, and reconciliation are so timely and helpful. Yeah, I have to say, this is one more moment when we remember what we've learned and continue to learn from recovery communities.
Mm-hmm.
Regard. I mean,
look at it. Mm-hmm.
My name's Scott. I'm an alcoholic.
Yeah.
Whatever. We're not going to look away from this.
And 30 years sober, you're still an alcoholic, right? Like, you're still making the claim of what you've been, what you are, and yeah. I have a few friends on social media who are in recovery, and one of them from Little Rock occasionally will post a long post that I find just really powerful. He's a dad, and he's healthy, and he's been sober for a long time. And yet his health today isn't letting go of what happened before. It's like, it's regarded. This is part of who I am. And Pádraig felt welcomed into that community again, because all of him was regarded, even the parts that might have made that community worried about him, concerned about him, being gay, I wonder if how can we learn from this as a church? I mean, I don't know. It just occurs to me that, are there places where we could be?
I keep thinking about, I don't know what your sermon, I'm looking forward to hearing it, about Ruth and Boaz, because I was thinking about the boundary when Amber was mentioning that, about how they meet at the gleaning, at the corner, at the boundary that was set aside because of people who were outcast, and he goes past the boundary, and all of the wonder that occurs there, sort of off in a small place that was reserved to regard folks who were not often regarded at all.
Well, yeah.
And I think about Calvary's location. I mean, as I remember well a man who had no legs who sat in front on 2nd Street in front of those red doors with a hat and sold pencils for a nickel. And it wasn't until many years later that somebody said, why is he outside? And opened those doors, those red doors. And that was the beginning, really, of the street ministry. I think there are people on the corners everywhere we go to be regarded.
Wow, Mimsy, that's powerful. We do learn not to pay attention to things that we don't want to see.
And that goes for both others and ourselves. Yeah. There's a lot of protection that happens, or that we try to put up so that we don't have to see the things that are hard.
About ourselves.
Yes, and others.
Yes, both. We have the same tendency toward ourselves. I'm gonna pretend that part, that memory. Maybe this is also this forgiveness piece, right? I'm gonna pretend that is not part of who I am, that wound. There's a beautiful, our Wednesday group read a commencement address by George Saunders, in which he says, who's a fiction writer, in which he's telling these graduates, I'm doing the old man thing, and I'm going to tell you some story about my past, what I wish I'd done. But he said, you know what? I'm going to tell you what I regret. I don't regret swimming in a tropical river that monkeys were pooping in, and it made me sick for 7 months. I don't regret being poor and broke. I don't regret all these things. He said, you know what I regret? In the 7th grade, there was a girl who came into our class who I wasn't kind to.
Yeah.
And 40 years later, I can't forget it. What I regret are the failures of kindness.
Yeah. Oh.
And it what are the things we are called to? What are the failures there? Simple acts of regarding and being kind, noticing that person might be the heart of it all.
You know, I've sometimes when I think about conflict in the church, right? And so the conflicts of our era being around race, and then the question of same-sex marriage and same-sex relationships and clergy, and thinking about the early conflicts of the church and how much we've gone through. Every moment seems like it's everything to the people who are right. And so when we gain some sort of historical perspective of like, people thinking what you think about the nature of the Virgin Mary or the Holy Spirit, would have gotten you completely ostracized from this community at some point in time. Way more than I've felt as a gay priest, right? Like you would have been gone. You would have been anathema. You would have been like, you can't even be looked at or consorted with until this right thinking was corrected and you made a public penance. And so there's something helpful to me about thinking about Pádraig coming into this community that was devoted to conflict, right? Like had been through conflict. And so something of what Pádraig brought in, the parts of him that would have caused conflict, has been brought into a space where we recognize that conflict can be dealt with, like that this has been done. And it's maybe something helpful for the Christian church, right? That if we can take stock of the very deep and grievous disagreements that we've had through 2,000 years of history, then maybe we get to deal and see with our own a little more lightly, a little more fully too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'll commend to you the study they made of Ruth, because we'll talk about it on Wednesday. But regarding what Amber's talking about, one of the brilliant things that I'll talk about in the sermon today is that Scripture is in conversation with itself. Scripture is in conflict with itself. The book of Ruth, in a sense, flies in the face of actually commandment.
Nehemiah and Ezra.
Definitely Nehemiah at the end, as far as whether we're going to build walls or we're going to include people. And also Moabites were to be excluded because they are excluded from the assembly of God's people. And then here's this story about a Moabite who makes her way all the way in. So another piece of this that Pádraig said, another conversation, and Glenn Jordan, the guy that he wrote this with, he knew when he was a boy. And he came out to Glenn, and Glenn at the time, he stopped and he didn't say anything for a minute. And then he said, what you've told me has changed me.
Yeah.
Didn't mean he was all the way down the road to realizing that Pádraig, the whole of Pádraig that he could be gay and part of gay and Christian and all of these things. But he didn't. He expressed it as tenderly, but also realizing how costly it was for his friend in that moment to say, "You've changed me. It's not like I've just stepped into the light. All of these things that I thought and I carried into this moment, they don't work for me right now." And that's that just unsettling liminal place where I realize I'm not at home with all of who I am and what I've learned about the world. Morning, Kiande.
That's such a better answer than "it doesn't matter to me. Let's talk about something else," right? Like,
yeah.
Which is what, like, I just love it, as though this wasn't a sort of costly admission. Because
I had a friend once say, "I think it's a great loss that we started saying no problem Instead of you're welcome, or no problem displaces, I'm sorry for this, no problem. I'm sorry, you're forgiven.
Yeah.
Dave says, Pádraig is saying that the truth of thin places is facing a reality as it is. As followers of Jesus, we regard the reality of our neighbors and seek to love and heal, just like Jesus. Yeah, facing reality as it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a mystical escape. It's, that's good.
And we had an experience the last 2 days where there was a terrible accident in our neighborhood, and it was really scary. And the person it was a dog who was harmed, and I really want to get those folks together to just talk about what happened. And I'm so scared because I feel responsible for the harm that came to this animal, and taking all my courage to try to regard it, and the people that live on my block. And so I appreciate the encouragement to not protect and just protect, things as they are, but to try to get into a real space with the people who are literally 100 feet away.
Yeah, that's the work. So in a way, you're something difficult happens and reconciliation is needed. How do I create a space that will be truthful, so that the reconciliation isn't a displacement of discomfort, but actually bring the hurt into the room so that we can move through it.
Yeah, I sure do like to displace discomfort, though.
Amen.
Yeah.
I think this is Karen's tweet that says, aren't most of us in recovery from something? We don't have those cracks through which the light shows, but only if we regard, as you say, only if we tell the truth about ourselves. This, I would think, every adult in our church shares, and the younger people may be in the middle of learning this. Yeah, in the middle, the younger people may actually be, I'll quote Ardell again, who has mentioned before that when Mary said yes to God, she was an adolescent. And that's a person in an in-between place. That's also a person prone to take crazy risks. That's also part of the genius of being in that place, that the person who say, there might be a place where younger people are actually in these rich boundary places and can see things and navigate places that would terrify me now.
Oh man, I'm so glad. Yeah, right. Like they are
Exactly.
so horrible to be in. Yeah.
Well, friends, it's 9:45. Love this. Thank you all for typing in your comments. Do join us Wednesday for Pádraig. I think you'll love it. His sermons had to be from his study over in Ireland, but he's delightful. Our conversation, that book of Ruth, Borders and Belonging. I recommend it. I'll recommend it in the sermon again.
Okay.
They were people in Ireland reading Ruth to have conversations around Brexit.
Good.
Oh,
Put that in your tea and steep it. Thank you, friends. We'll see you soon. Come join us for church in a minute.